Hi, so it is early November 2020. Just yesterday here in the United States, the presidential election was called for Joe Biden is going to be the next president. And no matter who you voted for or who you wish had made it to the presidential election or what your feelings are, what side of the political spectrum you're on, we have all experienced a lot of emotional turmoil and election anxiety. And we have been having uncomfortable conversations already. And with the holidays right around the corner, we're going to continue to have uncomfortable conversations. So I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of resources to share around this. So let's hop right in. So in case it's your first time here, my name is Mallory Whitfield, and growing up, I was not always great at having uncomfortable conversations or expressing my true deep feelings, thoughts, emotions. It's hard, y'all. It's really hard, and most of us are not trained to do this. I think a lot of us, like myself, tend to avoid conflict, and this year especially has brought out a lot of conflict in a lot of different ways around a lot of different important issues. A couple of years ago, I went through a lot of personal upheaval and turmoil that kind of forced me to start to understand how to communicate some of this stuff better, understand how to process it for myself first, so that then I could try to communicate better with the people in my life about uncomfortable, hard topics. About a year and a half ago, I actually wrote, produced, performed a one-person show, and I talked about some of this stuff in that show. If you're interested, you can actually see the full video on my YouTube channel. But one of the things that came up is I actually shared a story from a post-election uncomfortable conversation I had after the previous election in 2016. So when I told this story, a version of this story originally on stage, I actually used sock puppets, red and blue, to sort of lighten the mood a little bit. But I'll give you a little bit more of the actual background here on YouTube, minus the puppets. So if you think back to 4 years ago, both before that election and after that election, and same thing this year, right? I think we've all had a lot of personal things pop up with family members who think completely differently than us, or friends who think completely differently than us, or coworkers, or whoever it is. And I had a situation with a friend of mine not long after that election who has very different political views than I do. We'll call her Jane for this example. So Jane and I hadn't really seen each other a lot since the election. It was maybe 6 months after. But I think she anticipated a lot of antagonistic feelings from me, right? Because she kind of knew that we were on opposite ends of the spectrum as far as our thoughts about that. And so one night we were out at a party. She was pretty drunk already. I was not as drunk, but she was pretty drunk, and so she ended up sharing a lot of her feelings with me and her concerns and stuff, right? And she was like, I don't want to lose you as a friend. I'm really concerned about this, but so she's basically trying to explain her rationale for why she voted the way that she did, right? So she voted for Trump in the 2016 election. And so probably because she was pretty drunk and sort of that loosened her up, she ended up sharing some really, really deep personal stuff with me. Like, she literally said, I've never told this to anyone before, right? And basically a lot of very specific childhood trauma, sexual abuse situations like that, right? And kind of explaining why, because of that background, she had read and seen all of this news media that was positioning Hillary Clinton as the defender of rapists, right? And so this is not whether that's true or not. That's not the point of this particular example. The point is that she had this experience of past trauma, and then she was surrounded by this particular type of information coming from the news, coming from the social media channels that she was following. And so you pair those two things together, her past trauma and then all this information that she's receiving, And that's basically what caused her to sort of like, this is what I'm going to do. This is who I'm going to vote for, because I can't vote for a defender of rapists. Now, never mind the whole point about Trump and everything that he's done, right? Like, but it's hard to, if I had responded to that by saying, well, what about all of the terrible things that Trump has done? Like, how is that any better? There's no way I could have gotten through to her in that moment. Like, there's not, besides the fact that she was drinking at the time. So it's really hard to have uncomfortable conversations when one or more parties are intoxicated in some way. So tip number one for having uncomfortable conversations, if you're going to do it this holiday season or any other time, is have everybody be sober if you're going to have these conversations, right? So anyway, so she's sharing with me all of this very personal, very traumatic stuff. She's being super vulnerable with me, right? She's saying, like, I don't even know if her husband knew all of these specific examples or not. I'm not really sure, but she kept repeating how she'd never told anyone this stuff before, right? And so to me, that became like, I have to hold space for this person who is hurting right now. It doesn't matter that we believe completely different things politically. What matters is that this is a person that I care about, and this is a person that is in a lot of pain right now. So I had to try to figure out how to bridge that divide between us, right? How to kind of keep that conversation moving in a direction that maybe we could continue to communicate and not have us both shut down. Because that's what happens a lot of times in these uncomfortable conversations, is that it just becomes this like wall and people can't communicate, and then suddenly you're like, I'm not your father, like I'm not your father anymore, I'm not your family anymore. So what I tried to do in this situation was really try to be empathetic and compassionate and listen to her, because in this moment, if I had responded with something like, oh no, here's why you're wrong, blah, 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 she was not in a mental and emotional place to be able to listen to that. So what I tried to do was hold space for her, because here is a friend, a person that I care about, who's hurting in that moment, right? She was in a lot of pain because she had pulled up some of those experiences from past traumas, right? So what I tried to do was try to think of ways in which we could find common ground. So I was trying to continue that communication and that dialogue. So we both live in South Louisiana. I live in New Orleans. And I was like, well, here's an issue that's pretty bipartisan, is our coastal wetlands we're losing them at this insane rate, which is a huge issue for climate change, which is a huge issue for like flooding. We have way more flooding than we used to decades ago. And that's a very bipartisan issue, I think, right? That's something that no matter what side you're on, we can both agree on. So I tried to use that as a way to be like, look, we still have things that we both care about, right? And I still care about you. When we have these uncomfortable conversations, and we should have these uncomfortable conversations, we can't start from a place of attack or blame, because that's only going to make the person that's on the other side of this conversation just like stick into what they already think. You're never going to convince somebody of your opinion if you're just attacking and blaming them. So one thing that I would suggest to do is to not position it as you did this, or you believe this, or the thing that you believe is wrong. Is instead try to find the common ground by coming from a place of sharing your own experience with them. So using like I statements. If you've ever looked at any sort of like basic conflict resolution, even if it's like boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, sort of just, fighting, try to use those I statements, like I feel this because blah, blah, blah. So if you are somebody who cares passionately about progressive issues, if you're someone who is all about social justice and diversity and inclusion and building a more inclusive world for everyone, which, yes, I'm all there with you, totally. The thing is, it might feel like really obvious and easy to just automatically discount anybody who voted for Trump, whether in 2016 or whether in this recent election, as this evil person, as this racist person, as this like white supremacist person. And yes, like a majority of people who voted for Trump are white, right? I am also white, not vote for him. But the thing is, some of those people from 2016 did change between 2016 and 2020, right? And the way to keep shifting that, the way to keep having more people be more open to those progressive values, those inclusive values of including everyone and starting to understand the needs of other people, the way to do that is not by framing them as the devil, as the evil person, as the other. That's only going to make them dig deeper into their own existing positions, right? That's not the way to change somebody's mind. And so the example of my friend that I just shared, I think is similar to a lot of people who voted for Trump in whichever election, right? Is that we have this crisis of polarization and disinformation and misinformation. And a lot of that is because of social media. And so I've worked in marketing for the last, full-time the last 5 or 6 years, but I've been deeply, deeply involved in the online world and social media for the last 15 plus years. And so I understand, I've seen the ways in which the algorithms on Facebook, Instagram, here on YouTube, everywhere, they create these situations in which we have a feedback loop. If we're interested in something, whether it's plants or dogs or a certain political spectrum, right? The algorithms are going to continue to show us more and more and more of that content. And the more we click, the more it'll show us. And so it becomes this funnel where we start to just only see ideas that are similar to ours and people who look and think like us. And it takes a lot of conscious effort to get outside of that. And so if you're interested in learning more about that particular aspect, I haven't seen the documentary on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, but I've heard great things about it, especially if you aren't aware of all of those algorithms and things that all of the social media platforms are doing. There's a lot of ways in which social media has created so much good things in terms of the way that we can communicate with each other. But it's also created a lot of problems. And I think it's important for as many of us as possible to be aware of that and to be aware of how we can communicate differently. Here's the thing, these uncomfortable conversations, they need to happen outside of social media. A Facebook comment thread or an Instagram comment thread or whatever, this back and forth where you're leaving a comment and there's no tone, and emojis even can be misinterpreted by people depending on their own experiences and point of view. You're leaving that comment, somebody a few hours later comes back, sees that comment, interprets it through their own lens of their lived experience, their own whatever they're going through that day or that month or whatever. And it becomes this cycle where communication just breaks down, things get misinterpreted, people get all riled up. These uncomfortable conversations need to happen in some sort of face-to-face format, right? And so through the pandemic, obviously we can't have the in-person conversations as much as we used to, but we can still have conversations face-to-face via technology, via things like Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or whatever it is. Because when we have conversations, even if it's on a phone, even if we can just hear the tone in somebody's voice or see the emotions and the expressions on their faces, that can give us that pause so that, like my example of my friend, if you see that that person is starting to feel pain or starting to, feel really hurt, you can kind of take a step back. Maybe you're both feeling that, right? So maybe you need to bring down the energy level together in order to create some space and to create that bridge for more of a dialogue instead of just pushing your opinion or having them push their opinion on you. So here's another example. Have you ever heard the phrase, hurt people, right? The idea is that if we've experienced hurt or pain or trauma, then we're gonna take that out on other people a lot of times. So I had this situation happen to me a few years ago. I used to do a podcast. It was called Badass Creatives. You can still find all the old episodes at badasscreatives.com or on iTunes, wherever you listen. So anyway, I did this one podcast episode about selling at craft shows, because that's something I did for a really long time. And on that particular podcast episode, I started with this whole story about how my partner at the time, my boyfriend, he was getting ready to do his first craft show. So I was like using that as this example of, if you're doing this for the first time, these are some of the things that you might want to consider, right? So anyway, months, maybe year after I released that initial episode, I got this email in response to it. And this lady who emailed me, she was very upset, right? She was like, this podcast is useless. I don't understand why you're just like rattling on about your boyfriend. This is totally useless. So yeah, so when I first got that email, very out of the blue, very unexpected, very like, what the? I was like, what is this lady coming at me for? I was just trying to offer free information. The podcast is free to listen to. I give out all this like free information, just trying to help people. And she's all upset. Like, you didn't pay anything. You just, okay, you spent like 15, 20 minutes of your time to listen to this. Like, I'm sorry. And my immediate response was like, I want to tell her off. This woman is crazy. What the F, right? But instead of just like responding immediately, I took some time to sort of like calm myself before I just responded immediately. So like, okay, uncomfortable conversation, another tip, don't just respond immediately. If you're getting like super riled up, like take some time, get back in your body, breathe, do some yoga, take a walk, like do some meditation, do some breaths. So did all of that. And then I realized, like, I had heard about this story in the news not too long before that with Sarah Silverman, the comedian. So Sarah Silverman had this guy on Twitter that was just like berating her and saying all this mean stuff and like 4-letter words at her, whatever, calling her all sorts of names. And Sarah Silverman, instead of just snapping back at him, calling him names in response, which she could easily have done, instead, she took some time to kind of dig back through his Twitter feed, and what she noticed was this guy was clearly dealing with some medical issues, clearly dealing with a lot of like pain and trauma and just some horrific stuff in his life. So when she did respond to this guy's very abrasive comments at her, instead of just coming back to him from a similar place of anger, she came back to him from a place of compassion and empathy. It turned into this amazing story. You can go look it up. I'll drop a link in the description below. But I basically remembered that whole example and was like, okay, wait, I'm going to try to channel my inner Sarah Silverman here, right? And try to respond to this woman who'd reached out to me in a likewise manner. So I responded to this email and I was like, first off, I am really sorry that this podcast episode wasn't useful for you. I know lots of other people have found it useful. I'm sorry. But also, what you said and the way that you said it to me was really hurtful. But I understand that for you to have said that stuff to me out of the blue, there's probably something that you're going through. I have no idea what that is, but whatever it is, I hope that you find peace and healing soon. Like, I really do. So I sent her that email, and then a few hours later, she responded, and it was not the response that I expected to get. Y'all, I really did have like a Sarah Silverman situation. So this woman was like, you're right, I'm sorry. My boyfriend just dumped me. So hearing you talk about your boyfriend getting ready to do his first craft show just like triggered me, basically. And she lashed out at me. So yeah, so like that was a really big lesson for me, was trying to constantly, if I have those situations, whether it's in an in-person conversation or whether it's, you know, a terrible troll comment or whatever, is being like, why is this person acting out this way, right? Because people who have a lot of self-love, a lot of self-compassion, a lot of emotional intelligence. People like that don't troll people online. They don't send nasty comments or nasty tweets or nasty whatever, right? But people who are deeply hurt for whatever reason will often lash out at other people. So all of this, yeah, these are some of the lessons I've learned over the years. And so I mentioned the word self-compassion. And there is a book called SelfCompassion. So this book, y'all, this book was such a huge turning point for me, and I've kind of revisited it, and it's really meant a lot to me. So SelfCompassion, it's written by Dr. Kristen Neff, and she talks a lot in this book about kind of the difference between self-compassion versus self-esteem, right? Because here, especially in the United States, I don't know if it's the same way in the rest of the world, but we have this thing where we try to promote self-esteem, especially in kids, right? And I remember that as a kid. Like, I think I always had good self-esteem because I made good grades, I was good at a lot of stuff, like, you know, certain things came easy to me, and I was like, yeah. But I would also beat myself up so hard. I would say things to myself that I would never say to anybody else. And I think a lot of us do this, right? We talk to ourselves in these horrible, mean ways that we would never talk to a friend, never talk to a loved one, right? But what they found through all this research about compassion and self-compassion is that as we're able to cultivate compassion for ourselves, we're also able to be more compassionate towards other people. So I highly encourage you to check out this book. I also have a Skillshare class. It's about an hour long of videos on self-compassion specifically, so I'll also drop a link to that in the description below. There's another great book called Nonviolent Communication. I actually lent my copy to a friend, so I don't have it with me, but it is so amazing. It's Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, I believe is his name, and he's passed away now, but they've created this whole like system and framework for nonviolent communication. He worked in a lot of the most conflict-riddled places in the world, you know, like Palestine, and trying to get people who were on very opposite ends of an issue or an ideological spectrum to at least be able to have that like bridge of communication. So that book is so amazing, so highly recommended. And finally, another resource that I've recently discovered is Luna Nicole, who writes Conflict Transformation. You can subscribe to the newsletter. They recently wrote an article about maintaining difference, so specifically talking about this whole communication and these uncomfortable conversations during election time, both pre-election and post-election. Some really, really good examples in there, so I'll include that link in the description too. Okay, so that was a lot. I have a lot of other thoughts. I don't want to make this video like 2 hours long. So let me know, is there somebody in your life that you think you might try to have some of these uncomfortable conversations with, whether this holiday season or another time? Let me know in the comments below. If any of these particular resources resonated or the stories or examples resonated, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to know what you're curious about. I'm going to continue making more videos for YouTube. So yeah, let me know what you want to hear. Bye. Much love.